He is Jim Jorden, Jim Jorden Productions. His resume speaks for himself. A 16-time Emmy Award winner, worked with the NFL, IMG, NASCAR, SEC Network. We could continue on with all the outfits that he is a part of. Also a motivational speaker. And I think the portion of this interview is going to be finding out what's inspirational about Jim, because there's a lot that he's done in the business that a lot of people could learn from. His mindset, his creativity. And I want to spotlight that on the On to Something podcast here. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor for Fox Sports Radio. Jim, it is a pleasure to have you on with me here. And as someone like yourself who is so creative when it comes to storytelling, the documentaries, and you work so much in sports media, what is something creative that you're looking to implement in your work that maybe in the past you didn't? Something new age, something cutting edge that you think is really going to help ripen your content and your product as a storyteller?
Well, what I like to do is I like to mic up whoever we're following for sound, and I like to shoot it from a distance. So it's kind of like you're a fly in the wall. I like to try to capture that person's personality. What I have found when I work for the NFL is the head coaches all had very different personalities, and they're all different types of leaders. So back in the day, Mike Holmgren he's big. He's like 6'6". He's weighs a lot, and he's very, very intimidating. And that was kind of his leadership style. He was an intimidator. He actually threatened to cut a player during a game. And he was doing it just because he wanted all the starters to know that, nobody is safe, that you have to perform all the time. And then there was a guy like Mike Shanahan. He was an intellectual. And so during the Super Bowl, when they beat the Falcons, as the Falcons were driving down the field for a drive, he was on the sideline with John Elway, and they were changing a play called a quarterback keep pass, where the quarterback rolls out to the right, and usually the wideout runs a comeback. He turned it to a deep post, not paying attention at all to what the Falcons were doing. The Falcons got down in the red zone. They missed a field goal. Elway went out there, and he threw then what was at the time the longest touchdown in Super Bowl history, all on that adjustment that they made during the drive. And so John Gruden was a guy, he's back coaching now. He was very sarcastic. He used that a lot of times. And Steve Mariucci was a head coach at the time, and he used humor. So they all use different communication methods to get through to their players. And so when I always did shows and do shows now, that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm trying to really tell it. It's an authentic story because it really is who your personality is. But, it's usually always positive stuff that you're doing, but you're trying to put something in your shows that when people watch it, they can apply it to their life, and they, their surroundings and people can be better from something that they've seen in the show.
You brought up a wide receiver route tree. I feel like the Jim Jorden route tree is the go route because that's all he's done in his career. And the ability to capture these personalities of these football coaches, and of course you worked so long and had so much success NFL films. What is it like getting them comfortable? Because when they're comfortable, I would assume, Jim, that is when you get the best bites out of them, the best display of personality. But you have to create that safe space. What does that look like for you and your production team?
No, it's always based on a personal relationship, and it's based on trust. And so, for NFL films, they have an incredible reputation. So the coaches are usually always comfortable to begin with them. But then when you do it with the same team and the same coaches over time, they get to know you. And there's not a friendship, but you feel like you know them because you're listening to them all the time. They don't know you at all because you're behind a camera or far away. But I was doing Mike Holmgren one time in Seattle during a game, and he goes, Where's the NFL guy? Where's the NFL guy? And I'm like looking around going, like, is he talking about me? And so I kind of waved. And he goes, come out here. And I'm like, on the field, like during a game? So I went up on the sideline next to him, and he goes, now look, I'm going to get really mad here. I just want to make sure that you're going to take care of me later on. I'm like, oh yeah, coach, we got your back. Don't worry about it. And so he then went on an incredible rant, which, he just wanted to make sure that, that would never see the light of day because, for various reasons. And so that was kind of interesting. I always remember that of him calling me up there during a game. And I was like, wow, I just said, oh yeah, no, we're going to be positive, and whatever we use, we're going to use it in a light to to show things that you're trying to do to enhance it. But it's an emotional game, and all the time, I would never want anyone to mic me up and follow me around, especially at the times when I really get mad and lose it and stuff like that. And so, they're people too, and so it's the same thing for them.
For someone like you, Jim, who does so much behind the scenes work with sports and capturing, like you said, the emotion and everything that goes involved in the games that we don't see as the casual fan, if we were to do a behind the scenes documentary on Jim Jorden, what would we learn about him that we would not see as someone who on the surface is putting out all these great award-winning productions? We see that, we see you out there in public, but the nitty-gritty, the stuff that isn't seen by the public, the work that you really put in, what does that look like from a perspective that the outsiders have no clue about?
Well, one person that I've done a lot of work around is Joe Gibbs, and he is a Hall of Fame coach in the NFL, and then he went and started a NASCAR team. And so when we went to NASCAR, they had not had a lot of behind the scenes access in the sport up to that time. And so one of the first things I did was I went to see him, and I brought a piece that I had done on the Houston Oilers that really dissected the run and shoot offense. And I had Kevin Gilbride up at a board, and I had him drawing up plays. And then we cut to him wired in a game, calling the play. And then we went to Warren Moon calling the play in the huddle. And then we cut to interviews with the receivers describing the routes. And so I said, Coach, this is what I want to do in racing, the same type of thing. And so he said something that was really important. He said, Jim, football and racing are the same thing. You don't win with X's and O's, you win with people. People are what's really important to organizations. And so if you ask me that question, you would see the incredible people that I've been surrounded by in my career that are part of everything that I do, that I rely on. And, we're just another team. We're covering two teams playing a game or a race. There's 43 teams, but the production team is just another team, trying to accomplish the same thing, trying to put together a winning story, trying to evoke emotion, trying to touch, move, and inspire people with the product that we're making. And so that to me is what is the fun part of the show. You're going to make shows that some people really love. Usually, if you're a fan of the team, you're going to like it no matter what. You're trying to get the non-casual fan to really enjoy the show and really understand something. But that it's always about the people that are working with you, putting together, no matter what you're doing. That depends on your success.
That team you employ, that pit crew, if you will, so much success, so special. And what would I learn about you, Jim, coming out of college at Wheaton, before all of this happened? What would I learn about the way you conduct yourself, the way you carry yourself, your drive, that would give me a little bit of a premonition that everything that would come in front of you now would be possible if I met you, a snapshot of you just out of college?
Well, everything that I'm doing now is a function of something I've done my entire life. So when I grew up in my neighborhood, it was back when you had to call people on a phone and you had to have their phone numbers memorized to call them. And so I was a person that called everybody to get together at Lawson Field to play touch football. Say, we'll be there Saturday at 9:00. Can you be there? I call the next person. So that today is like organizing a shoot, right? I'm getting all the cameramen and the audio people and the producers together to do the show. So that's the same. Then my dad was an orthopedic surgeon, and he owned an office building. And so growing up, I would cut the grass and paint the outside of the building. And he would say, Jim, your summer job is to paint the outside of the building. Well, I would go and hire like 3 or 4 friends, and we get it done in like a week. And so I was, hiring people to do something to work with me. I didn't know what that would lead to, but that's what it was. And then when I was in college, I was able to do his office bookkeeping for his accounts payable and his insurance and his payroll. And so now when I do productions, I'm doing budgeting and stuff like that. So it's really interesting how all those things lead to some aspect of what I'm doing today. But the biggest thing that I learned coming out of college was I loved NFL films growing up. And so back in the day when things were only on TV once, I would watch NFL films every Sunday when it came on TV. And then when it would rain and snow, I lived in Chicago, I'd get my dad to go outside and throw me footballs in the snow, just like I saw Terry Bradshaw, throwing balls in the snow back in the day, or the rain or something like that. And I really wanted to be a wide receiver, but I wasn't very fast, or I wasn't very good, and I never played. And so before my senior year in high school, I found out who's going to be the quarterback. And every morning we went in and we caught passes before school. Every day during the summer, we did that. And what I learned was success through repetition. And so that year, my senior year in high school, actually was pretty good. I got to go play in college. I did the same thing in college with the quarterback who was there. For the level that we played at, which was a low level, we actually had a very successful statistic career, but it was that success through repetition. If I do the same thing again and again and again, I can learn to be successful at it. And so, that is kind of what I've applied to my career going forward post college is do that. Not try to be great at everything, pick out one or two things, really work on that and try to be good at it.
Right now, what do you think you're greatest at?
I believe in people, and I like people, and I think that I try to make people better working with them, and so and I try to be very encouraging to them. And I get mad, a lot, and I'm not as explosive as I was when I was younger, but uh, that is probably what I enjoy most is seeing people's ability and finding out, because everybody just like myself, there's something that they're very good at. And so what I try to do is put them in that position to be successful for what they're good at, and then build a team around those types of things.
When you see all of it come to fruition like that, how do you come to terms with how you were able to make that happen, as far as just on a deep level of saying, look, we made this happen, and when you rate the level of fulfillment and how rewarding that is, and what that means to you, that aspect?
Well, like in football, you can never ask the father of a recruit how good his son is, because he's going to think his son is great. It's just a parent thing. It's just the way that it is. When you make a show, when you get done, you're always going to think it's good because you've worked really hard on it. And so for me, the test is, many years later, if I go back and watch something, you know, I won't necessarily remember what comes next. And if I'm engaged and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. That worked out pretty well. I'll kind of remember the struggle of the production or what we didn't put in it, what we had to take out of it for whatever reason, for whoever's approving it, et cetera, et cetera. I'll remember that more than the actual show. So when I watch work later on, years later, I'm usually pleasantly surprised of, oh yeah, that turned out pretty well. The reverse of that is while I'm doing something, um, I'm never sure like how it's going to turn out. I'm never sure whether it's going to be good or not. And so when we were at NASCAR, we had the show called Beyond the Wheel, and it was basically the behind the scenes of a race, shot with film and sound and everything, and put together. And every week it would air on, I think, Thursday. And so Thursday morning, people would say, "Hey, how's the show this week?" And I would be totally honest. I'd be like, "I don't even know if it's going to air, and I don't know if it's going to be any good." But I found that if you hit your marks along the way and you get the different people to do different aspects of it, it just always came together and it always ended up being a good show. And so, you really can't take time to look far ahead. You really can't take time to look way back. You just have to keep concentrating on what you're doing right there and then, and if you're doing something you're passionate about and something that you love, and I bet if you surround yourself with good people, it's definitely going to turn out probably pretty well.
Jim Jorden is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. One of the things that you've done is your work with the Pac-12, and I want to get into that in just a moment. But you speak about assessing your work. What about it when you go back and critique things, whether it was something you did 10 years ago or something you did a year ago? What's hardest about watching it in terms of what's hardest to feel impressed about?
I would say overall, what kind of story are you telling? What's really great about social media today is what's really bad about it is you
Yeah.
can get all the criticisms, which for a filmmaker storyteller are fantastic because uh, I've had shows, especially in football, where I have both coaches mic'd up. And so we're in the locker room before the game, and Coach A is giving his speech, and Coach B is giving his speech. And then fans will weigh in on why one coach is better than the other. And so I read their commentary and I'm like, well, they're right. This Coach A is a way better speech giver than Coach B. And so then what I have to be careful of is I don't want to put Coach B in a situation where he is criticized unjustly because he's in our show.
Wow.
So maybe I'll only use Coach A in that circumstance. I won't use Coach B at all. And I would have never thought of that had I not read that kind of stuff on social media. There's also a number of times where I've considered not putting something in a show at all. And that is the one thing that sparks a huge reaction with fans. And I think, wow, you don't know how close I was to not being in the show for whatever reason. So that is, the social media aspect is great. The criticism part is great if you can look at it and not let it hurt your feelings, and then use that information to try to make a better product in the future.
Yeah, we all know that some people are negative just for the sake of being negative on social media, and it doesn't do anybody any good, and it doesn't come from a constructive criticism point of view. But when we pivot over to the Pac-12 and what you did with UCLA, Jim Moore is somebody that I've gotten to know over the years a little bit with the coaches show I do at UCLA. It had a really nice bond with him. Somebody you bonded with as well, and you documented that great season that they had from spring ball all the way into the regular season. What was it like being boots on the ground and being able to document so much of this team behind the scenes and what you saw from the program through it all?
That was a fun experience. The year before, we had done Cal and Arizona State in the same show. And so it was 50-50. And so in 14, we said, let's just try it with one team and see how it goes. So it ended up being UCLA. We started in spring ball. We were there as he's building the team and everything. We did stuff over the summer. One of the really neat things we did over the summer is we went with Brent Hundley and two other players to a place where they jumped off rocks into a water. I mean, it was a true college experience. We go through camp, everything's great. Their first game, they went to Virginia. They won that game. The defense scored like 2 touchdowns, which, Jim Moore is a defensive coach, so that went well. And we got up to the Texas game, and we always had cut a preview of the show coming up from stuff from practice. And when we got done cutting the preview, somebody on the team would approve it. And so in practice, Jim Moore sang the song, "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You," to a player. And so we put that in a promo, and the team approved it. So leading up to the game, we got a phone call, and Jim Moore was really upset that made air. So he, quote, fired us. And we're like, well, what does that mean we're fired? Like, is the show over? And they're like, no, still come to the game. Because, we'll just see how it goes. So we went to the game. Brent Hundley got hurt. Jerry Neuheisel came in and saved the day. It was a great epic win. They played it in Dallas against Texas in Jerry Jones Stadium. And that show turned out fantastic. And so Jim Moore really liked the show. So we were kind of back okay, but we weren't okay. So we were kind of like suspended. And so for the next week or so, we were allowed to come to practice, but we weren't. We were allowed to shoot this, but we weren't. And so eventually we got back in his good graces, and he was happy the whole time. But it was just one of those things that, we didn't have any malintent when we did it. Sure. But everything is about perception, right? It's how you look at it. It's your own background of how you internalize something. And so he thought that made him look bad or silly, even though whoever approved it at the school did not. And we bear the brunt of that, even though we shouldn't have, because it was their approval process. So again, what I said about earlier is you always have to be careful of the material and how you use it for how someone else is going to look at it. Because, a lot of times you have to be, there's a saying, be responsible for your listening. Well, I have to be responsible for the way that you're going to perceive that material when I put it out there.
That's such a great point. Jim Jorden with us, of course, executive producer, Jim Jorden Productions, working with all sorts of outfits, sports media, 16-time Emmy Award winner. I'm Bryan Fenley. And another coach I believe you worked with a couple years after that at UCLA, but not at UCLA, still in the Pac-12, was Mike Leach, if I'm not mistaken. You did the piece on Washington State. I believe it was on HBO, and it was a really neat look into what Leach was doing up in Pullman before he moved to Mississippi State. Wow. Getting an opportunity to canvas Mike Leach, and such an entertaining guy. What was that experience like for you as well?
Yeah, he just thinks differently than everybody else in a very, very creative way, and he communicates differently. We actually, for our SEC Inside show, we shot Texas A&M last week, and the opponent was Mississippi State, and they won the game. So in that show, if the home team wins, we stay mostly with the home team. But if the visiting team wins, we kind of gravitate towards the visitor. So we started the game in Texas A&M's locker room, and we ended the game in Mississippi State's locker room. And his speech after the game for Mississippi State at Texas A&M was one of the best speeches I've ever heard him give. He just talked about how their team is better than they think they are, but they're not there yet. But for his time at Mississippi State in 2 years, this was the most complete game that they have played. And then he went through all the reasons why. And so, everybody communicates in a different way, but there's always a level where you can capture how authentic somebody really is and the way their style, their coaching style. I always call it their coaching philosophy. When I worked with Pete Carroll in 2012, I was with the Seahawks for the season. His thing was a coach should be able to put down in 25 words what their coaching philosophy is. Wow. And that was one of his, and he certainly could. And so I feel like we do that a lot of times in the sound that we get during games. And so that locker room with Mike Leach in post game when he won at Texas A&M, he's played there 6 times. He's won 4 times. I mean, that's more successful than probably any other coach, in Aggie land as an opponent.
You've seen so many coaches post-game speeches. You've seen a lot of coaches pre-game speeches. On top of the one you just mentioned with Mike Leach, and certainly you talked about Jim Jorden being up and close with him. What are some of the speeches that are underrated that you had access to and you saw, whether it was the NFL or in college, that you felt were some of the finest work in conversing a coach to his players in a moment, in the heat of the battle, right afterwards, where it really struck you on a profound level?
Yeah. Well, present day, Kirby Smart at Georgia gets us as a camera crew fired up.
Wow.
I mean, his speeches are fantastic. I've never been in a locker room for a bad pregame speech. I can't think of many coaches that don't even give a pregame speech. They're always saying something, the last second to address the team before they go out there and play. Back in the day, Marty Schottenheimer was one of my favorite ones when he was with the Browns, and then he was with the Chiefs. He always had some kind of phrase. One time he came in and he said, "Boat's loaded, let's row." And that was his ending phrase. He said, "There's a gleam, man. There's a gleam. You got to get that gleam." I mean, he just had a lot of those. Sound is so prevalent all over the place now, especially with the internet, that a lot of times these phrases that these coaches say, people will say them in society of things. I remember one time I was walking through a restaurant and I heard somebody say, "You're killing me, Whitey, you're killing me." And that was a direct quote from Lou Saban when he coached the Broncos way back in the day. But, it was in someone's general vocabulary that they were saying from that. So that's what's great about always having the opportunity to bring that to the public's eye, because, nobody else is in there. They don't get to see things. And so, presented in the right atmosphere, they can be quite inspirational.
Speaking of someone who's inspirational, speaking of somebody who's probably given a great speech or two, what are you like as a motivator around your team during a production? And maybe there's a phrase or two that should get tossed around in society and pop culture today that you say, what is it like when I'm listening to you, if I'm part of your team, and how you're going to get me revved up for a broadcast or for a shoot?
Well, when I was at the NFL, I was part of a department that was probably about 100 people. And then when I was at NASCAR, we had a department that was probably even a little bit bigger than that. One thing that I learned early on was you can't treat everybody the same. Jimmy Johnson one time with the Cowboys gave a great example. He said, "Hey, if player A falls asleep in the meeting, I'm going to cut him. But if player B, Troy Aikman, falls asleep, I'm going to say, Troy, wake up." And so you treat everybody differently, but also people can handle criticism differently. There are some people that you really have to yell at them to get them motivated. And there are other people, if you yell at them, they will not respond well at all. So as a coach or any kind of leader of a company, you have to just realize that people are motivated by different things. I got to work for Steve Sable at NFL Films, who is the greatest boss and person of all time. In fact, yesterday at NFL Films, they had Steve Sable Day. They celebrated his Hall of Fame induction. I happened to be there because I was working on a project. So, I got to see a bunch of people I used to work with. It was great. People who were retired came back. But, Steve said, you can't put a timetable on creativity, but creative always expands to fit the time allotted. And that's so true. He says it takes 90% of your effort for 50% of your result. Okay. And it takes the other 50% of your effort for the final 10%. And most people won't do that final 10%.
Interesting.
So it's really hard to get something from good to great. He used to say 90% of people quit when they have 10% of the way to go. So those are all Sableisms that we repeat all the time when we work, from having been around him. And he was also a big believer in watching everything. And then he called it stealing or borrowing creatively to implement in your work. So he used to read magazines all the time and cut out lines of script or ideas. And then he would put them on an index card and had a filing cabinet system in his office of probably over 10,000 different things that he would go to every once in a while. And so, he just always was just absorbing things all over the place, the most creative person that I've ever been around. And so that influence on myself and the people that I work with, most of the guys I work with today are people from NFL Films. Like we work together there. We went together at NASCAR. We're now together in the college group. And so it's been a lot of fun to work with the same people consistently for, 20 plus years in this business.
Yeah, when you have that cohesion like a team on the sports field, it's that much better. When you got a football team that has all seniors, chances are they're going to play a lot better than a bunch of freshmen. Right. Jim Jorden is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. Jim, my final question for you, and I'm extremely grateful to have you along here on the On to Something podcast, is you spoke about the Sableisms and what he does to improve and always push the envelope. What do you think you can do personally to continue to push the envelope yourself? And what is something you are focusing on that you can get better at as a storyteller? Because I know, living inside the headspace of Jim Jorden, there is nothing complacent about it. You're always striving for the next big thing, the next creative idea. So what is that like for you? How would you like to continue to move forward in that focus?
Well, we're always looking for different ways to document the game. I remember a number of years ago, when we were at NASCAR, and they came out with these new cameras that had a different type of sensor. I think they were called like D1s or something like that back then. And the first time I saw the image, I was like, wow, what's that? It looks kind of different. Right now the rage on TV for the network games are these 8K cameras that they're calling it. And it's really just a prime lens with a defocused background, that makes it really sharp. I believe that, with it going to the truck and then getting transmitted to your home, it's so downgraded. If it ever started out as 8K, it's not that anymore. But people have responded to that look as it's being a very interesting thing. So in sports, we're always looking to do something like that. When I was at NASCAR, I always wanted to somehow invent a lens that was inside the driver's face mask so you could see the reaction to things, right? So it's always looking for a different way to bring the viewer down to the field. And then the other thing that's really happening right now in sports documentary filmmaking is a lot of these types of shows are going on mainstream platforms, with Paramount Plus and Peacock and Amazon and Netflix and everything. There's really more of a reality TV formula applied to sports. And, I remember David Hill, who used to run Fox back in the day. He said, you can put a wireless microphone on anybody and just watch it, and it's compelling. Well, it's not true anymore because everybody's mic'd up all the time, so now you really have to work on the story. And so in the structure of shows, if you watch something like, The Housewives of Beverly Hills or one of those types of shows, and then you watch, a sports documentary show, you'll see a similar structure between those two formats, which used to not be the case. as much as it is today.
Today, I do know one thing. Jim Jorden is one of the most creative, most talented storytellers in sports media. And if you consider anybody that's watching this or listening to this a sports fan, you're not really considered one until you see one of Jim Jordan's masterpieces. He's done so many different things. SEC Inside is one of the things you're working on right now, Jim. And really appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. Your introspection, your insights, priceless, invaluable, and what makes you inspirational and why you've built up such a juggernaut in the business. And I'm excited to see what is up next for you. Jim Jorden, I'm Bryan Fenley. Thank you so much for doing this.
It wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. I'm used to being on your side. I'm not used to being on this side. So thanks for having me.